I want to welcome everybody to the live from One Cancer Place, the first of 2022. I want to invite all of our invitees and our special guests, Liza Marshall and her husband, John, the doc, who are going to talk to us about their experience of conceiving of and writing and delivering the most wonderful book in the world called Off Our Chests, about their experience of breast cancer with Liza. And where we are is on the almighty Zoom, that's what I call it. And why we do this is to interconnect with and help deliver education from our guests to a public audience. Ultimately, this recorded conversation will be in our library or our family room of the One Cancer Place address once that website is revamped. What we ordinarily do is we use the first hour, part one we call it, for the discussion between Dr. Chris Heery, who is our host and good friend to all of us. And what we do is we wrap up part one after an hour and usually have a Q&A with our patients that have been in on part one to ask Dr. Chris questions and for clarifications of some of the things that they may have learned. We're not going to do that today. I'm going to tell you that right up front. It is a holiday, and Dr. Chris has some kids' activities to attend to, and we're going to be cutting this thing off at an hour. But before we get launched, I want to make sure that I thank everybody that is involved in this production. Dr. Heery, our volunteers from One Cancer Place, Sarah Edgell, who's our creative director, and then our funders, our first year supporters, the companies CGen, Mirati Therapeutics, Buddha Logic, and Natera. And we are also supported by the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. And for all the support, we are most grateful. So, Dr. Chris, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Erica. For those who do not know, we're going to be mainly talking about this book, Off Our Chest. One of, in my opinion, the most insightful books I've read about the experience of dealing with cancer, because it gives us the perspective of someone who deals with cancer literally every day and thinks about it all the time. And then someone who, if it was, from what I read, probably spent all of their time trying to avoid thinking about cancer as much as they could. And how those two things come together in the story of Liza's breast cancer journey. So I think one other thing I should introduce on this topic is I've known Dr. Marshall, John Marshall, for now about 12 years, something like that, 13 years. He was one of the first people who helped train me when I started in oncology. When I trained at the NCI, they would ship us off to Georgetown because that's the place where real medicine happened, not just all clinical research. And so I was lucky enough to be in Dr. Marshall's clinic quite a bit, and over the years grew to see him as a mentor and got to spend more time with him even after I finished my training because there was so much to learn from him. So I have really been looking forward to having the chance to talk to you both about this book anyway. And so now we just get to do it in front of a recorded Zoom camera. So I'll let you guys kind of introduce maybe how you decided to write the book and sort of what brought it all about. And then we can go lots of directions, but I have a few things I would definitely want to get to. So maybe you could give the intro.
Well, sure. I'll introduce this woman next to me. This is Liza, my wife. We met in one of our favorite places, Durham, North Carolina, in Clock Tower Quad in 1981. It was across a keg. It was at a keg party. It was love at first sight. And we got married right after college and married ever since. Liza's an attorney, practiced communications law for a long time. We put each other through school. She did more of the paying for school. I did more of the going to school. We eventually got out. We live in Washington, D.C. We have 2 kids, and she's been very involved in all sorts of cancer support activities, helped found a cancer support community here called Hope Connection. So it's on the founding board. And as Chris already alluded to, who, if you all don't know already, Chris is like the nicest and smartest human being on the planet. So we were, when the thought of getting to talk to Chris about this, we were jumped at it. But as Chris said, we were indeed the cancer family, but Liza really took one for the team. You might comment a little bit about my advocacy against breast cancer, maybe, and then that kind of sets some of the tension on this.
Yeah. So, well, a little bit of the background on John is the non-educational piece is, first, John grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, but John lost his mother to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 13. So having, I think at that point already decided he was interested in medicine, he started to develop a calling to oncology. And for those of you who know oncologists and people who are in cancer treatment, I think it really is a calling. As he developed, as Chris pointed out, John not only is at Georgetown, but he has been at Georgetown since 1988. He did both his residency and his oncology fellowship there. And Georgetown was a very strong breast cancer center. That is what they trained pretty much everybody to do. It was the vast majority of patients. It was the vast majority of funding. And really all the other cancers were considered to be relatively unimportant, I think, in many ways. And so John, who is always, roots for the underdog, decided to go into gastrointestinal oncology, and which has brought him a wonderful career and wonderful patients and some great successes and advances. But it is still an area that has nothing like the success that breast cancer does. And funding, breast cancer gets 10 times as much funding as all the other cancers put together. And the advances in breast cancer have outstripped those in all other cancers except childhood cancers. And so I was then diagnosed with breast cancer in 2006, which John, who had been speaking for years about his envy of the breast cancer movement, and that, he really, gastrointestinal cancers were being ignored. Everybody knows what month breast cancer month is, but nobody knows what month, pancreas cancer is, or very few people do, or colon cancer. So he, as I say, this is the ultimate vengeance, but it took us a long time, but it is what led to the book, really. Back to the very roundabout way to Chris's question, but is that we realized that not only did, do we bring I think a unique perspective, or fairly unique perspective, with an oncologist husband and a cancer patient wife, but there was this sort of dramatic tension, and that John was pretty well known for his public resentment of the breast cancer movement. He wasn't quiet about it. And so, the idea that now he was having to contend with this and really had to be in it and grateful to it, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. And then they did an article, the local Arlington magazine, we live in Arlington, Virginia, and did a article meant to be on Liza and her advocacy and her breast cancer story.
But John had to jump in.
I did. I jumped right into the article. And when people read it, our friend is a writer and a brilliant editor herself, read it, she goes, there's a story here. And we made one failure to launch attempt at writing the book a few years after your diagnosis, and realized that we didn't have the bandwidth at the time. The kids were still here and work was still very busy. And so we put it off. But in reality, as we thought about it, we weren't ready to write this. I mean, part of what this book is about was off our chests to each other. And we were still too close to it. And it really took time and distance. And then sort of a had to take a sabbatical or die moment in my own career to give us the space and the quiet to stop and write. And I think what few people realize when they read it is we had no idea what the other one was writing. We went to our separate corners. We were lucky enough to be in Oxford, England at the time. I went down to the library at the Jesuit College. Liza stayed in the flat. A few months later, we had what we were going to say. We exchanged pretty much everything we had written, which made for a very long 3 days while we read those and read what the other was thinking and said about the other. It was quite blunt. We got through that. And then in the end, they cut out most of what I wrote because I went on way too long. And we have the book. So that's how it came about. Very long answer to your question, Chris. Sorry about that.
No, it's great because I think it gives, for anyone who has not read the book, first buy it and read the book because it really is an incredibly insightful book. But I think you just gave a nice overview to lead into some of the topics that I wanted to talk about today. So the one you've already touched on that I think kind of comes towards the end of the book is the impact of all of these very complicated decisions you had to make along the way on just each of your psyche as you get later and later in the years. And maybe now you're at the point where, the cancer's not coming back, and how much toll that's taken, and particularly on you, John. There's a part that you write about very close to the end of the book where you say, it seemed to have drained more out of you, where Liza, it seemed like you kind of took it as it came and just kept powering through. And then when it was over, it was almost like relief for you. But for John, it seemed like it just kind of took more of your emotion. And maybe as a result, you put more into the care of your patients than anyone can have to give. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I thought I was really the best doctor ever before, right? Most doctors do, by the way, but I thought I really did. And then when our experience with Liza's cancer, we had incredible care. It was, yes, at our place, but everybody just loved us and took care of us. And and then I'm the head of the group, right? So once we had received this care, I sort of felt guilty that could we provide this for others? Our doctors gave us, Liza's doctors gave us instant access, of course, and we didn't have to make any, and didn't have to wait on hold to schedule our scans. It just magically happened for us. And could I, in my position, provide that for not only my patients for the department, but for the department as a whole? And so, and this is, Chris, you and I were working together through a lot of this. My patients, they got my business card with my email on it, and they got my cell phone, and it was very hard for me to separate myself from their experience. Their good news was my good news, but their bad news was also my bad news, a bad scan or a side effect or a setback. I felt that as if it was my own family, that it was also my responsibility to do everything I could do to make it better. And as you do that for year after year, I was really getting to the point where a new patient coming in, all I was seeing was the end of the story, that I was going to have to watch that patient die. And that's very blunt talk, but but that's part of our job. It is, but it's one of those parts of the job that you don't think about on the first day. And so the weight of that really did get to me. And you noticed it too. I mean, everybody was seeing it.
Well, and I think, having said it, he developed, I think, also a bleaker view of everything. So, having said that, that wasn't necessarily what was going to happen with patients, but that was where your mind went first.
Right.
As it was harder to see the bigger picture, I think.
And in GI cancers in particular, we have been making success, but we're not been seeing the kinds of success we'd like to see. And patients are getting younger. They're too young. That wasn't what we signed up for. And so you put all of that together, and it did. It was exhausting for me, and ultimately needed a change. And so, we've been talking a lot to medical communities about the book, and they've been very interested in the burnout side of things, because people are especially feeling it right now because of the pandemic plus cancer, and you can't have visitors, and all of the added burden of cancer care, even in the last couple of years, has rung true. And so what we're trying to take from the book, and my coming clean about my own burnout, is not answers, but at least let's talk about it. And one of the things I learned from Liza is about, if patients know that about us too, that their awareness is just as important as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of what we hope is one of the themes of the book is letting patients, helping doctors understand what patients are going through, but also helping patients understand what doctors are going through, and that it is, and not just doctors, but, oncology nurses and the people in the lab, and, that all of these people bring their own frailties and imperfections to all interactions, and we're all trying our best, and but we don't always succeed. And so, we hope that we talk about that people will start to give grace to each other, a little more grace, which I realize is in many ways in this country is getting to be less and less, but at least in the cancer community, perhaps we can be a symbol or an example for the rest of the country in trying to develop that empathy for each other and understanding.
And then one last thing on this was my evolution of the role of the caregiver. Because, I used to think of the caregiver as kind of irritating, right? So the patient is who I'm there to see, not the spouse or the friend who's sitting next to them, taking notes and bugging me because I forgot to do the refill or whatever that was. And I used to feel kind of irritated because they always had some more to ask me, to where after I became the caregiver and had that role, I sort of realized that maybe the most important person in the room is the caregiver. The patient kind of will understand, but as long as the caregiver knows what we're talking about and knows the plan and what we said and has the notes and has the next step, then things are going to go well. And so that I've shifted my thinking of the importance. So now one of my first questions I ask for patients, or new patients, is I say, well, who's that? And I make them tell me who that is. I'm not going to assume it's a spouse. I ask who it is. How are you all getting along? Jokingly, because it's actually a very nice test question. How are they getting along? How stressful is this right now for them? Who else knows you're here? The biopsy of the village, so to speak, to how many people know you're in the room right now with seeing me? And just valuing that person, as I say, maybe the most important person in the room.
There are some themes, a few things you touched on that I want to draw out just a little bit more. So one is, in your case, and I think this is why every new patient should read this book for any cancer, is because as you go through the evolution of the series of events that you live through, right, which are actually, I don't want to say common, but they are relatively, aside from the sort of the severity of the pathology that you were diagnosed with, it was a fairly straightforward treatment course. And yet, even with that, having an oncologist as a husband was incredibly complicated, just to be able to say, I want to be seen at this office, or I want to have this done on this day, or I want to have a Metaport in or not, right? Like, those decisions seem to us on the treatment side of it, like everyone should know what to do. Right. Of course, we kind of forget that no one's ever thought about this until the day they're diagnosed with a cancer, right? So I want to hear you guys just maybe riff on that a little bit about the decision making and what you could help new patients from thinking through that standpoint. And then the other one is, and maybe you could start with this one because it's a little simpler, just the number of people you interacted with along the course of your treatment journey, right? I mean, if you counted them all up, just individual people, it has to be 60 or 70 at least, right? At least, maybe more. Yeah. And I'd love to hear just some perspectives on those two things, because I think that's really what, like, it really comes out as you're reading the book, just how how complicated the decision making is, how many people are involved in coordinating all of that effort.
Yeah, well, so maybe it can be a compound answer. I'm very bad at compound questions, so if I don't
All right,
get
well
that
then let's start with whichever
together,
one you like
I will
better.
hopefully not forget the second part. But anyway, they fit well together. Yeah, no, definitely. I think. I mean, your point about just the numbers and the concreteness of that, of how many people, I mean, you say that, and I'm sitting here thinking of, the person who injected the dye into my breast the day before the surgery for the sentinel node, and the person who, took blood and re-injected it so I could have a mug scan, and, and those are people that I saw for 5 minutes, as you say, all the way up to, my medical oncologist and my surgical oncologist. My surgical oncologist I continue to see to this day. So, I certainly think it's probably, probably close to 100 by the time you count all the people. And John always points out, parking attendants are very important to your cancer experience. I mean, the how you get from your house into that office is part of what puts you in a mood for the day and puts other people in a mood for the day. So, all of those components are really important.
I'm going to interrupt before you go to the second half, because just to Chris's point, that, okay, let's say there are 3 people in the room, maybe 4, right? There's a doctor, maybe a fellow or another nurse with the doctor. And then there's usually 2 people, sometimes 3. Right now it's only 1 because of COVID, right? So what it took to get those 3 to 4 people together at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning to have a discussion, every 2 weeks or whatever it is, the villages on both sides, the huge army of cancer care, from the medical professional side, the huge village that has to be there. You don't really see it or feel it till you lived it. And it struck me, as you know, in the book as well. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the decision-making piece. I mean, I do think I hope that one of the values of the book is I do think my course was a fairly standard course, which I hope is helpful to people, because I think it does lay out pretty much what cancer treatment from diagnosis to follow-up survivorship looks like. Not in every single detail, but as you say, at the sort of a little bit higher level of regular doctor visits and blood tests and scans and chemotherapy and then the decision making, which is such a huge part. And one of the things we talk about, the wham effect of that sort of, no matter how prepared you think you are for a cancer diagnosis, and there are some people obviously who have genetic variations that they know they probably will get one someday, but no matter what, even if you think that, it's still a massive shock when somebody finally says to you, you have cancer. And then the next discussion is, okay, and here are 3 clinical trials, and you should pick which one you want to be on. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. Okay, first, I'm not hearing anything you just said. And secondly, I don't understand what those words mean. I mean, I knew what clinical trials were because John was the head of clinical research, but I didn't know what any of the components were and why I should pick this one over that one. With a pretty sophisticated knowledge, I didn't know that. So I can't imagine when you don't even know, you've never heard the word Taxol before, or whatever whatever the drug is it's being used, trying to understand that and then pick one. And honestly, we don't even know why we picked the one we picked. And it turned out to be a negative result. I mean, fortunately, mine had actually just extra cycles or with additional drugs. So it was, my outcome was fine. It probably did a little more damage to my body than I needed to, but I am happy to have participated in clinical research because I really do think it's hugely important, and it's how the treatment of any disease is going to advance. And so I, not to be a cheerleader, but I kind of am for clinical research. But yeah, those are complicated decisions, and I dropped off that trial and picked up another drug along the way, which is its own story. But the important part of that story is, we got advice, just random advice from an old colleague of John's that I should try this other drug. And, patients get that, right? Not just from old oncology colleagues, but everybody in their neighborhood and everybody in their family has an opinion on where you should be seen, what medication you should be taking, both, from a treatment point of view, but then also side effects, take castor oil, or whatever. I mean, I'm making that up, but so there are just so many components, and it is really complicated. And I think trying to filter out what's important and what isn't is something to learn. But I hope that with the book, at least people might go in a little more prepared for that. I mean, they're not going to read it until they've been diagnosed probably, but hopefully fairly quickly we'll start to be able to give themselves some agency to say, slow down, give me the facts. I need to think about it, write them down or give it to me in writing. Have a really good caregiver who takes notes for you and asks questions.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about, from the medical side, we talk about, what's called shared decision making. And we understand, particularly in oncology, where there isn't an absolute right answer in a lot of things that we recommend. There are choices. And you can follow whatever the recipe is for the standard of care, but even that has choices within it. So you try the best you can in these 30-minute, 1 hour long meetings with patients to help guide them. You walk in the room with a favorite, you then review the choices, and then you sit back, you try to explain it as best you can, and you put it all over there, and you say, what do you want to do? Just like Liza said. So, okay, now you choose. And there's no way. I mean, the reason we do that is because we don't know the answer, right? We tell you what we know, and we hand it to you, and we say, you pick, and then we put in the bottom of your note, one of my favorite lines in one of your chapters is like, the patient completely understands everything I just said, right? Is in one of her progress notes. And no way. I mean, I don't completely understand everything I just said to the patient. So how can the patient understand? So but, to kind of take that to clinical trials, to me, that's sort of reassuring. That's sort of the ultimate second opinion, is participation in clinical trials, because it's taking whatever the current standard is usually and pushing it or modifying it in some way because we think it'll move the bar further forward. And of course, there are risks to that. But I think one of the reasons we participated in trials is we wanted more treatment. And it was a cooperative group trial, which felt very comfortable for me.
You might want to explain what a cooperative group is.
Yeah, so it's this national NCI-funded group that gets together on a regular basis and picks what they think collaboratively is the best question to ask. And these trials get proposed, they get voted on, the NIH and FDA and other groups then approve them. So they're not necessarily pharmaceutical industry sponsored, although they can be. But they to me are sort of the I don't mean this negatively, but kind of the cleanest studies in some ways. So when a clinical trial like that was offered to me as a non-breast cancer expert, it felt comfortable. It felt like it was asking a good question. It may push the bar further. And I wasn't the one going to have to take the chemo anyway. So it was fine with me.
Yeah, one of the things that you don't address at all, at least tell me if I miss it in the book, you actually don't really talk about cancer biology or, the nitty gritty of kind of what, you do, Dr. Marshall, and what my career was and still is developing new therapies. And I think that's a really interesting because when you're in the position of dealing with a loved one or being the person diagnosed, that stuff is all gobbledygook anyway, right? Like it's just noise at that point, because what you have is what's in front of you, what you have information and knowledge about. And that stuff, like you said, it's all just down to odds. It's not like we can know for any given patient. And this is a topic where I do think that breast cancer can teach us some very, very important lessons. And I think you touch on this just a little bit. You don't go into huge detail about it, but the identification of HER2, the identification of estrogen receptor signaling, et cetera, in breast cancer, I believe has shown us a paradigm for how we can improve outcomes in other cancers. And the one advantage that breast cancer has over all these other cancers is starting a lot earlier, other than lymphomas and some other hematologic malignancies, but they have a huge head start on this, largely because of the dollars that were invested. and also in some cases due to complete luck. Let's be honest. I mean, a lot of times cancer research comes down to total luck. But what do we take away from that as we think about patients with colon cancer or lung cancer or whatever it is? Like, how do you apply that? You know, your thought process, your evolution of thought from, you know, I'm so frustrated that, you know, Komen raises whatever they raise and the GI foundations can't raise anything. Where are you now on that? Say 15 years later, how does that change your thinking?
Well, I'll come to your first comment about, I didn't write anything about the biology of cancer. The realities of book writing. Yeah, I did, but it's on the cutting room floor. So that's the book. Next book.
That's the appendix.
The appendix. Yeah, we'll put that. Yeah, thanks for that sore spot. Anyway, because I did think it was important that people understood the basic reason of cancer, right? Because it's mostly not anybody's fault, right? There is a randomness.
Well, I will say, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's one of the first chapters, you give a layman's version of what cancer is, which I think is fantastic. If you want to know a reason to buy the book just for like if all you read is the first chapter or two where that is, it is great because you can go and talk to your loved ones in terms that actually would make some sense. And I've actually recommended to people in my family when I say, hey, I know you don't know what I do, but if you read this chapter, it'll really help you.
That's what I do. Yeah. But one of the takeaways, you know, for all of my jealousy of breast cancer, it does work. Now the whole strategy of attracting researchers will follow the money, raise the money, researchers will come, and we'll learn some cancer biology. And one of our fundamental lessons we learned is that it's different among the different cancers. So the rules of one don't always apply to the rules of the other. So that's you know, something that's happened during our career, that recognition. Some things will trade over, but not everything does. You know, Liza, you know, reminds me all the time that the reason we started with breast cancer was really a reaction to the underfunding of women's health. So this was health research, yeah, and access. So you know, there was a long way to catch up on that, and I, you know, so I have to remember that it was appropriate, and I'm glad it was successful. But you know, where I am now is still sort of the same place, and that is I sort of shifted a lot of my energy and my focus not to individual studies. I stopped being interested in one study or the other, but in trying to change the infrastructure of research, precision medicine, advocacy, raising money, doing the kinds of things that traditional grant funding doesn't cover, to try and leapfrog, as you say, to get lucky, to try to roll some dice on some things and maybe get lucky on some new biology or new understanding of how cancer works. Like my current love, my family is sick of hearing about this, is the microbiome. Is, you know, we've been looking at maybe only half of our health interface of the bacteria that live in our mouths and our GI tracts and everywhere else. We've been washing that away to study the human side of that interface, when in fact, I'm sure there's a reason we evolved to share this planet with the bacteria in and around us. So now what we're looking at that is that's one of the most exciting new areas that. So it's being a little bit crazy. It's being a little bit about talking about the things that we're not seeing. I think I equate myself to Don Quixote in the book. It's like, you know, what windmill am I going to joust at this time? And, you know, sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong, but I think we have to think that way. There's incrementalism in research. So there's studies or science trials or even basic science that look at a very fundamental question, what I think of as incrementalism, that form our base of knowledge. And then there's sort of the risk, the high risk, high reward luck that we trip across that all of a sudden leaps us. So Chris, you and I are a perfect example of having spent a decade, maybe a decade and a half, thinking about vaccines to stimulate the immune system, when all along the immune system was probably being stimulated but stifled in a different way, or at least one of the ways. And so it took a different way of looking at immunology. We were trying to turn it on, wake it up, whereas what we needed to do was cut the brakes for a lot of patients. And so we were doing the incrementalism then when somebody else did the big switch. So, the hope is.
It's a great point. I think particularly the topic of infrastructure. So you touch in the book a fair amount on the way the medical system in the United States is set up, that it's fairly counterproductive to actually making great progress rapidly, because there are entities within the medical system who are incentivized to try to extract as much as possible out of it, right? Without naming any names, you even hint at maybe there's a huge hospital chain that has actually been created exactly to extract as much as they can out of every patient's care from a financial standpoint. And
that was recently purchased by City of Hope.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be that specific, but I could have guessed which one you meant. Yeah. So listen, I think that is absolutely true. I don't think there's really much doubt about that. And the question is, how much of a sweeping change would we need to have in this country to really change that? Is that an entirely new system of healthcare? Is that, what is it? What have you, I'm sure you two have talked about it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to value for me, but I preach, costs and expensive stuff, right? And can we justify it? And then Liza, of course, needs an expensive drug. And I mentioned that, and then I become like, am I just being cheap, right? And when I should be using all the tools in the toolbox, regardless of their cost. So Liza's experience allowed me to see it from both sides. The individual who wants everything they can get for their person, their working, their loved one, regardless of cost. And then from a systems perspective of saying, but wait, we can't afford that. We're actually not making it. It's not balancing. It's not a balanced budget.
I mean, I think the most telling, I can't remember what you all probably know, can give me the where we are, but what we spend more money per capita than any country in the world, and yet our outcomes are much lower. We go back, we talk a lot about communication, and I think a lot of this is branding. I mean, I think it's not branding, but marketing. It's talking. I'm personally a universal healthcare advocate, so I think that's part of the problem is this our insurance system and the middlemen and all of that just raise the cost without any result. But then I think there's also this communication with patients about more and more expensive doesn't mean better. And I don't think we've done a very good job as a country. And of course, doctors are then stuck in that. Some may feel one way and some may feel the other, but I'm not sure how much power they have to control and to tell you can't have a CAT scan because that's wasteful. Well, they're not going to do that. They're just going to sign the order. And I say in the book, I was actually relieved at the point in which I was told I couldn't have, my insurance company wouldn't pay for, I guess I was doing every 3 month or 6 month CAT scans at that point. Maybe it was all together, and I really didn't enjoy them. It was, I don't mind the scan itself, but it just made me nervous every time I went in for it. And it reminded me, every 6 months I'd have to go back to thinking again, was there something? And I said to the doctor, does it make any difference if I'm having them every 6 months or, if we wait for symptoms? And she's like, honestly, you're waiting for symptoms is going to be just as good as having, good or bad, however you want to look at it, as having a scan. And it's not going to change anything. You're not going to find it any earlier if you're having a scan every 6 months. So anyway, that's a long answer, but
we don't feel what we're spending, right? We don't, in the healthcare side, we're incentivized to do things to people, right? So the more visits, the more tests, the more whatever, the more money our hospital system makes. So we are incentivized to be efficient and high flow through and use expensive drugs and all of those things, because that's the way the model works. And it's the only country in the world. We're having a debate in Washington about should we allow us to negotiate the cost of drugs. You should see the ads here in Washington that we get on both sides. We get the AARP ad, which is like, you've got to let us negotiate, otherwise you can't have access. And then you've got the sort of somewhat pharma-sponsored ads that basically say you'll kill innovation.
Well, and we saved you from COVID.
And we saved you from COVID.
Yeah.
You don't want us to
Yeah.
not save you
Which
from the
is
next one.
true, but
Right. So they are very, so that conflict of the model, we're playing out every day right now on our airwaves as that debate rages here in Washington. I come back to sort of a value. I'd like to incentivize. The payer has interestingly not been involved in this the way I think they should be. I actually think like payers could figure out a way to, if you go on a clinical trial and it's one of their approved clinical trials, they'll waive your copays, or because that's now a cost share, right? So, some of the expenses.
I'd go a step further. I think they should send money to the patient.
Right?
So,
yeah.
Or send money to the physician who referred that patient to the clinical trial, because they just saved probably $20,000-$30,000 over the next 6 months for the.
I love the old. It's true that if you stopped smoking, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but to try and get people to stop smoking, insurance companies would send patients $10 a month. Their policy was thousands of dollars. But they would send them $10 a month, a check. Not cut their bill, but would send a check. And if you kept not smoking, and it works like a charm. So, that why aren't our partners in healthcare, right? So every month out of our paycheck comes a big chunk that Georgetown pays some, we pay some to Blue Cross, right? And so why not that's my partner in healthcare. And they're providing us support. So we need to be thinking more clearly about how we do that, not just at the Medicare level, the government insurance, but private payers. And they've surprisingly not wanted to get in this business with us.
Yeah, I know this isn't the main topic here, but I'll just say that there's not much incentive to fix the current problem in the United States for insurers, because they're making a ton of money too.
Right.
They have figured out a way to make that all work. And I'll just say, Dr. Marshall knows this, but I left academic research to go work in the pharma industry. And I will say 95% of the people I interact with have nothing but the best of intentions. They just want to make better therapies for people and all of that. There are certainly some bad actors, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are some people who are all about the bottom line. But what's interesting is that it's very, very difficult to be a company that's trying to make innovative medicines and not go out of business and not just spend all the money.
Right.
So there are a lot of conflicting problems here that are not simple, but I do think some standard level of care for every patient is probably necessary for us to be able to set prices. And I don't just mean for drugs, I mean for how we take care of people.
Totally agree. And it would simplify our lives. This is basic healthcare in the United States. We help define that. And then you can have more insurance to get you more access to this or that. But then it's back to value. So to me, I think we always pick on Great Britain, but the what they do for almost everything they put on the public health tab is they have a medical discussion about what's it going to cost, what's it going to gain, and is it worth it? So I think we had that actually then incentivizes the kind of research that you're doing, that we're doing, that is not small, teeny tiny gains in outcome. They still matter, the teeny tiny gains, but they're not worth as much, you could argue, than one that's transformative, like HER2, like ER.
Right.
That is huge, right? So
and there's still room in a system like that where somebody wants to get supplemental insurance or pay out of pocket for something else. They can do it if they think it's really worth it, right? But, all right, I do, before we run out of time, we have about 10, 15 minutes. There's something in the book that I just think is so fascinating. I think it was really brave for you all to share this, which is, you enter in the discussion about, you're 20 years into marriage at this point, roughly, no, at the time of your diagnosis. Yeah. you're living your lives, which means taking care of the kids, going to work every day, just keeping it all together. And then this happens, and it's like a bomb, right? And it forces you to reconsider everything, the way you value things. You fight your way through it. And on the back end, writing this book and rethinking through all of that, and just what has that done for you two, just as people, as a couple, as a family? Could you maybe just talk through sort of the whole range of emotions over that whole period of time? Because I think this is one of the most fascinating things about the book.
Well, yeah, I'll start. So, I mean, you pictured or made the first part of, I think that quite well. Yeah, we were fine. I don't think we were heading for divorce or anything, but well, John and I have different theories on that.
No, we weren't.
But we did pretty much live our own lives. I was home with the kids, had various volunteer activities. John was, I think we discussed this before, but John traveled a lot and did not include me in the decision-making about that most of the time. And so there was this sort of simmering resentment. I think John was like, "You're home, what do you have to do?" And I was like, "Well, great, but you're never here." And, as you say, then all of a sudden there's this bomb of a cancer diagnosis. And John couldn't travel as much, but although that lasted about a month and then he got back on the road again. But we did, it was, I mean, I find the two things, as you say, sort of the writing of the book and and the cancer experience, sort of parallel experiences for us, because I think what I have taken out of both of them is that we really actually, this is probably sort of where we started in marriage, we like working on projects together. Now, I would not choose a cancer diagnosis as my joint project of choice, but it was very illuminating, I think. And it was something that, and in a sense again, lucky is probably not the right word. That was fortuitous, I guess, that, that I happened to get the thing that John knew a lot about. So we did talk about it in ways that we might not have been able to, I think, had John not been an oncologist. I think, I guess, yeah. And then there's sort of, then there was that burnout period, I think, for John, which really grew from, I finished treatment in 2007 and really all the way up until 2019. And it was a slow progression, or maybe it was a slow progression and then a sort of ramp up. But John, really started to feel his work very deeply, and he was bringing it home. I mean, and when I say bringing it home, it was 24 hours. He developed insomnia, quite bad insomnia, and he was grouchy and he wasn't fun. And and again, I wasn't going to leave him over that, but it was something we had to get through. And I think the sabbatical. Thank God for Georgetown and the fact that they would grant John the sabbatical and that we could go away somewhere. And these are, as with cancer, again, it required my sister being able to take care of my parents and the kids. And, it required everybody, lots of other people jumping in and
village,
picking up duties so that we could go away and do this. And it really was, I think, using your word transformative about, transformative for us in being able to write the book, but also for our marriage and being able, in the first place, knowing that we could actually stand to be together alone in a small apartment for 4 months and write pretty raw stuff that we then shared with each other, and to be able to get through that.
But Chris, I could say, and I know we're in different generations of life and career, but I still may not have learned my lesson on this. First
he's still traveling all the time.
Well, no, but I'm now starting to think about slowing down. Having fewer jobs, and I continue to be very torn between this calling to try and cure cancer, whether it's one person at a time or, in a trial or a discovery, more than that, right? So, and I know you share this. I know you work very hard and you think about it a lot because it's what we are called to do. And we each bring that to the table. And so for me, I still feel very compelled to give as much of my energy as I can to that cause. And yes, dragging Liza along, and this book has been an opportunity for us to do that together on some level, right? Sharing a different message. around it. So I've just dragged you even further along, but different, in order to maintain sanity and the like, you have to balance those things. I'm getting better at it. I have learned, that's not true. I haven't learned no lesson. I've learned some lesson. And then, but back to when you say couples and patients should read this, it is a strain, cancer is a major strain on a relationship. And either it gets closer or it gets further apart. It is not uncommon for us to see couples break up within the first year or so of a new cancer diagnosis. And it's usually the man who bolts, because that's men are shits, as we all know. But it sometimes is the other way. But it usually is. I will just say, in my observation, it's usually that direction. But I think we have to recognize that this is a major strain on people, and help take care of that part of it too. So that's why that caregiver is just as important. Is that we need to make sure that everybody's okay there. Going forward.
Yeah, well, I will say from a personal perspective, I actually had this conversation with a very close friend of mine who, when I met you, or when you were going through this diagnosis, you were the same age I am and my wife are now. Our kids are the same age as your kids were then. And a lot of that, because I met Emma and she was already in college. so years later, and I was thinking, gosh, that must have felt like a flash of time to you all, right? I mean, from the time you were diagnosed until the time, we were standing there and Emma, I think, was a freshman, that must have felt like no time at all looking back, and probably still does today. And I think that urgency, if there's something we could convey, I think most people who work in cancer feel like there isn't enough time to do all the things that need to be done. And I think what this series is for is to let patients know that this is a challenge. Even if you know everything there is to know about the infrastructure, the science, it's still really hard. And these are intended to give people some insights into, you shouldn't feel like you're too dumb to figure this out. Most people can't figure this out, even if they've spent 20 years on it. They can't figure it out. I've had the chance, since we worked together, to talk to many people trying to solve these problems, Erica and team amongst them. And there is no simple solution, but one solution is to get more people up to a level of just some basic understanding of what they're dealing with, and knowing that it's okay to ask questions that seem really silly, but they're not. Mm-hmm. And the other thing we're trying to do here is to find the people who have all the resources in front of them, like Liza did, and and say, how can I help facilitate other people who don't have all those resources figuring this stuff out? You say at one point in the book, how can we make it so everyone who comes into Lombardi gets the same experience Liza did? Well, the answer is you can't today. But how could we change that model? I think is something we all need to think about, because while you think it was luck, I do think there's probably a component of having the assistants, knowing what to worry about. All of those things add up to better outcomes over time. Maybe not for you individually, but for more people. So that's what we're aiming for. That's what we hope these videos bring to people. And I want to give you guys the opportunity to kind of close us out with any comments or things we didn't touch on, anything else you wanted to talk about.
It's John. John's the closeout guy.
The thing we're going to do tonight, actually, the reason Emma's here tonight, is our Christmas project. Liza's great at keeping all these things, but we have all the little video cassettes from when the kids were young, and we just got them put on to digital. So now we can actually have cocktails with the children while we watch them. But they haven't seen these. I haven't seen these. And we may be up all night, who knows, watching this overnight, but we're going to relive some of those. One of us was behind the video camera, but anyway, we're going to do that tonight. We are taking time to do those kinds of things, and do remember the important things, because we never know what's going to happen. And Liza's point, I'll just re-echo it again, that being gracious to each other, forgiving each other, understanding that we're all doing the best we can. And if we can share that grace and a little bit better understanding, I'm convinced, just like you said, Chris, is that outcomes will be better, the cancer experience will be better, and more people will be cured of their disease.
Yeah, I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this. It sounds like tonight is going to be very fun. We've been recording so much of our children's lives that I can't wait for the day we can have a drink together and watch their silliness. But I want to thank you both for taking the time to write the book. I mean, it is going to change people's lives. And I know COVID may not have had the ramp up of going out and doing all the press that you would have liked to, but I think once enough people have read this is going to become one of those core books that everyone reads in cancer care. I think all fellows should read it. I think newly diagnosed patients should read it. I think it's just so powerful. So thank you again. And I hope I get to see you all in person before too long.
Very soon.
Yeah.
We'll come down to Durham and check you out.
Yes. Yeah, I'll get tickets if you want.
Thank you, everyone. Liza and her husband, John, and Dr. Chris for this wonderful program. Casey, Jennifer, Sarah, everybody that's been involved in this. And your evening sounds absolutely magnificent. And thank you so much for sharing you with me as you have over the years. I hope we can do more, and for sharing yourselves with all of the patients that we're fortunate enough to attract into our community called One Cancer Place. So thank you guys a ton.
We are honored to be a part of such a great group.
It is a great group. They're great people. So Casey, one of the things that you mentioned, I would like to ask you about in your chat though, and that was that point that you made about the metastatic breast cancer.
My Mets recurrence, which, last year, everybody in 2020 said pandemic, and 2021, I said, hold my beer, and literally crawled from my grave last June. But anyway, I was, bog standard, hormone positive, diagnosed at the end of 2007. Ergo, my book's title, Cancer for Christmas, because that's what I got for Christmas in 2007. Anyway, so fast forward some number of years, what was it, 12-ish, 13. But the thing about Komen that has always driven me ratchet is that they have this huge juggernaut brand, and they raise all this money, and they mostly use it to keep the pink ribbons going. And as far as the funding for research, they only about 7% total, Komen and everybody else, goes toward Mets. And then the recurrence stats are jacked because SEER only counts it as a recurrence if it happens within 5 years after the initial diagnosis. If you have a recurrence, even if it's molecularly identical to your original cancer, in other words, it's the same stuff and some cells are running around in your body and now it's back. And, hello, guilty as charged, and you get a recurrence 10, 11 years later. That doesn't count as a recurrence. That's a new, and I'm like, what? So that's a constant battle that those of us in the Mets community are fighting to try to get them to update the rules for how they put data in SEER, particularly for breast cancer. But, there's a million data points on this. I could keep talking for a week. I'm not going to.
So let me quickly change this and ask Jen to introduce herself to this little conversation and see if you have what questions you might have for Liza or John.
Sure. First of all, thanks. And thanks, Casey. I agree with the Mets thing. It's necessary. I got really fired up myself when you started talking about level of care and patient involvement in the legislative process. I, interestingly enough, was a consultant for the healthcare exchange in Colorado the first time it came up. So I get the insurance. I talk to people on the phone about how are we going to take this law and make it work, right? So I leave that contract and I get diagnosed with cancer. I have a contractor's insurance and they carved out all of my diagnostics. So I went through all my savings and all of that. And I just you just brought me back to that perspective of, oh my gosh, when are we going to get the patients involved in this? And so I'm just so grateful that you're paving that way for us. And I guess what I would ask is, if you were to point me in a direction to continue that conversation, where would you point me?
Well, it is a tricky conversation because there's a very large group, maybe the majority, that is just grateful for the current status quo, right? It gave them access and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and so they're the ones where we have to sort of, how do you empower those that are in your situation to a place and get together to speak to this issue? This sounds really backwards, but one of the things I'm grateful for young people now getting colon cancer, there's this big wave of young 20, 30s, and 40-year-olds getting colon cancer. And I'm like, it's terrible, right? It's the worst thing ever. But it's gotten awareness up. So all of a sudden there's new money, new awareness, new people talking about it. And so when things happen that just are shocking, then you get, people get together and talk about it. But we are, as Chris pointed out and others have said too, the status quo is very powerful. And when you look at an analogy I like to use, and this is tangential a little bit to what you're saying, but you go to a small town in the middle of the country right now, and, even the Walmart has left. Downtown's boarded up, and there's a lot of unemployment or whatever. But then you turn the corner, and there's the brand new shiny hospital that is still a booming industry, and the only business in town, because it's this false economy. It's back to, they're living off of this false economy, which is health insurance, and whether it's Medicare, Medicaid,
Yep.
whatever. If you remember back to the housing crisis and the economic crisis we had back 15 years ago now, it was obvious who's buying all of those really fancy houses, right? Well, they couldn't afford to buy those houses. It was false economy. So
Hedge funds.
I was on the beginning of that and that phenomenon as well.
Now hedge funds are into hospitals.
So anyway,
But,
it's the same issue. To me, it's this issue is that we see it day in and day out because we're living this economy, and yet you don't want to think about it because for those that it's not broken, love it.
Well, in the other point that came up to me is, as a consultant and just as my school of thought has always been that the Affordable Care Act is going to allow people to see behind the curtain, because they're going to get a bill for $1 bajillion for a very small procedure. And now people are aware. So the awareness has been painful, but it's there. It's just like any other, and change management is my specialty. So I'm really fascinated about how quickly we've changed so much during COVID because we had to.
Right.
We just had to. And so that sense of urgency is something that I think gets lost. And I also feel like after I am done fighting cancer, it is really hard for me to get enough energy to go back and fight.
Right.
I'm done.
I want to pile on what you said, because I think it's really, really insightful. So we're getting to a place where you have to be transparent about what you charge. So my hospital system has to say, this is what we charge. But they're fighting against that, right? Because they want to charge up here and then make a deal with somebody down here. We're developing an app right now it's a grant funding that we just got to be able to predict the out-of-pocket costs for a patient with a new diagnosis of cancer, right? So the idea here is you put in their code, their stage, their insurance provider, and this calculator, people know how to do this, but it's to put it in the hands of the patient so that they know 3 months from now they're going to get a bill, right? Because at the beginning, you don't think about it, right? You just give me what I need to do. And no one can tell you. Tell your story. That's the best story about it. What was it going to cover your Metaport coming out?
Yeah. Well, no, I had to get my Metaport removed, and I something had happened. I think I'd gotten some other bill about something wasn't covered, and so I called the insurance company and said, I have no way. You don't list interventional radiologists on your website as whether they're in network or out of network. And the woman, is on the phone with me, and she looks it up and she's like, yeah, we don't see it here either. Just have the procedure done and see if they cover it. And I'm like, what kind of an answer is that?
That's a true perspective. And I was a little embarrassed. I had to shop for my PET scan.
Right.
In the diagnosis stage, right? So I took
now who's doing the same, right?
I took the perspective. So I'm single. I didn't have a caregiver. I didn't have a job. I had just stopped that contract, or we rolled out of that contract probably for some political reason. And I didn't know where it was coming from, but I wasn't going to just give up. So I didn't look at the bills. I still have them. I still, I had to file bankruptcy, but very early on in my process, I accepted that and just kept out of that. If I hadn't, John, when you say, if you were to give me a picture of how much it costs up front, I seriously probably would have given up.
Well,
That's a good point.
It's actually, so I used to.
Sorry, Liza, if you were going there. I'm sorry.
I used to say from the podium in front of people when, some new medicine came out or something like that, okay, give me your Visa card and we'll swipe it and you can have whatever you want. And so what if it's going to be $100,000? And if you're 75 and it's going to add, 3 months to your life for $100,000, you wouldn't spend it. You'd give the $100,000 to your grandchildren and move on, right?
You give 50 to them and 50 on your trip to Europe.
There you go.
Don't be so sure, John.
Huh?
That's a good one.
So sure.
But some might spend it for the 3 months, but that's the transparency, right? That's
right.
It's going to cost this much. And that's where I would love payers to say, okay, so you've just been diagnosed with whatever. We'll give you $250,000 cash right now to not, consume, and you can spend it however you want, right? Because that's what we're about to spend on you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And after.
But those are really hard ethical questions, and it's really hard to.
Wait a minute, I'm gonna cut in here. I'm gonna cut in here and say that the drug that I'm on that's keeping me alive, is if it was if somebody was paying for it and they were paying list price, it'd be $14,000 a month.
Correct.
And this has given me about 3 years,
right.
Of time.
But that's value. To me, that's value.
Well, no, but let me finish. But our system, the US system, is so jacked that no one's paying for this.
Right.
Well, no one's paying any there's no cash exchange for the box of meds that lands on my door every month from drug company, because drug company is giving it to me for free. And if they can afford to do that for some people, I'm sorry, I think the $14,000 a month is a lie. So,
well, no, it is. It is.
That's what we were talking about. Yeah.
It actually doesn't cost $14,000 a month to pay for that drug, but that's what they need to get on the return, because they're patent life issues and all of those things.
Oh, no, it's balance sheet. It's just balance sheet. Just balance sheet.
And they're paying for the team. They're in a world where, and Chris alluded to this, where only about 1 out of 10 drugs they develop makes it. So what the $14,000 is actually paying for the 9 out of 10 that didn't.
Well, yeah, but even then, I'm gonna push back again, because so much of the clinical research money that's used for pick one, anything, is coming in some way through federal funding through the NIH.
Not as much as you might think.
Well, but and then academic medical centers, I mean, it's like, it's not just Pfizer or, whomever ponying up, like a gazillion billion bucks. It's not just them. There are a lot of other people playing, but they're the ones that end up getting the patent rights and the gigabucks.
Well, we talk about that in the book. Taxol drug Liza took was originally developed by the NCI, and then BMS bought the patent rights and made $1 billion on it. So yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, small biotech companies are doing that. That's their business model, is to take a drug far enough along to where some bigger company will buy it, and then develop, because they need the market cap to be able. It's complicated and it's multifactorial, right? So we could go on for days about the financial piece of all of this. But right now, as you say, the U.S. system, jacked is the right term. It's just, by law, we cannot judge value in the United States on healthcare. And that's the Bush bill.
Panels.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Republican bill that, it was for, so Medicare patients could have some drug support. That was the bill. And in exchange for that, we agreed, the United States government agreed that they would not judge value, that they could charge whatever they wanted and we would pay for it. That's the current law. And that's the law that's trying to be reversed.
Yeah.
So what can we do to help move the lever?
I think telling the story matters. I think, it's, as this discussion, I think now is a good time because it is a topic. It's right to Congress. And not necessarily the one on your side. It's not. I think it's not helpful. Back to Grace, to make one group evil and one group good. I think the system needs to be adjusted. We still want pharma to have the wherewithal for innovation and to develop new therapies and to help drive that. But we need everybody to have cancer care. And so how do we make a system that allows for that? And that's the language that grassroots consumers of cancer care are in favor of. And we're the target audience, right? So
is there a bill or something that I can support, or are there multiple, or what are you advocating for? And are they in the book? I'm sorry if I.
No, they're not.
No, this all came out. The bill that's going on right now is just, it's a Biden initiative. I don't even, is it in Build Back Bigger? Or
I think it was in Build Back Better, but they're going to start stripping out bits and pieces.
But it is one that they're in discussion about, and it's specific to cancer, and it's specific to drugs, and it's a toehold. It's not meant to. It's a first step to be able to say we want to be able to negotiate, and and I think it's a reasonable first step. But as you might think, the anxiety on the industry side is that it's the wedge that will then split this wide open for everybody.
I'm just laughing when I look up drug price negotiation bill. Find out what's missing. Of course, is the pharma thing from the current drug pricing bill.
Anyway,
like that's the first thing.
But that to me is
it's in the Build Back Better Act.
These kinds of events do help share stories, and being patient buddies, patient advocates, coaching patients that are new to it. It's part of what the book's about, is to try and be a coach for new patients and caregivers. Not be embarrassed about it, I think, is important.
Embarrassed about, can you say more about that?
That you had to go through.
Oh, that I wasn't able to pay for it, you mean? Yeah.
I mean, I
have no shame.
so a lot of my patients, I'm sure, don't tell me, right? That they don't want to know that something I prescribed was, they either never filled it or it took, as they traded their vacation for it. I think the more that we hear that, the more that there is pushback that I'm sorry, I can't do that. We need to think of another plan. The more it becomes an issue.
One of the reasons I have a recurrence is I wasn't able to take the medication that was to prevent recurrence for longer. I was supposed to take it for 5 years, only was able to take it for a year and a half because that's how long I could get free samples. After that, I couldn't afford it. So, here I am, but
Right.
it is what it is, but
But look, you're probably the right person to be in that situation because you seem like you've
well, I went
know
bankrupt
your stuff.
family caregiver 5 years before I got cancer.
Yeah.
So I was already out of money. And then I didn't have insurance for 5 years. Luckily, I had a little bit of insurance through cancer, but then I was uninsured for 5 years. So I'm also an expert at finding out how to find cash prices for healthcare.
Yeah.
I have lots of expertise.
Yeah,
Luckily
really.
now, because I'm an official old with original Medicare, not Medicare Advantage, because I'm not stupid. If I have to get stuck with the fee for service, so I don't have to play the games with the narrow networks, that's what I did. And I did that before I got cancer, got my recurrence. But, it's like you have to know all of this administrivia in order to not get crushed by
Right.
the tank treads of the American healthcare system.
Right.
To me, that says a lot about our culture.
Yeah.
We, this land of the free and home of the brave. Nope.
Well, it's just not transparent.
No, it's not. It's just not that. We like to tell ourselves stories, but we're not that. We could be if we pulled our heads out of our butts, but we ain't done that yet.
We like it up there.
It's
View's
comfortable, right?
terrible,
We
man.
don't like change.
Your navel makes a really terrible porthole.
We used to have a T-shirt. I still have a bunch of them that do colon cancer things called "Love Your Butt." It's like they're upside down hearts. Remember those, Erica?
Well, I
Erica,
have them. I have them. Are you kidding me?
I know. I probably.
We proudly wear it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Let me ask Julianne and Sarah if they have some thoughts, questions, comments.
I just really appreciate the talking about the caregiving aspect because I was caregiver obviously for 3.5 years, and it was me that asked the questions because my husband did not really want to go there. So I think that, it was, I ordered the book while I was watching this.
Thank you.
So I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, no, it's the caregiving. I think Erica, maybe somebody commented. I noticed a comment go by Erica. Was that you about caregiving? Is
That's me.
Yeah.
I can speak as a patient. I feel so. I know that the caregiver has it worse. I mean, if we're ill and we die from the cancer, they've lived through all of that, and then the aftermath, and no one has reached out to support them. All the attention goes on the patient.
Right.
It's a terrible situation. So I really believe that. I really believe
one of the things I love about this organization I'm involved with is that we do parallel patient support groups and caregiver support groups because it is a completely different set of concerns, and they do need a place to go talk with other people about how hard it is. So, patients do too, but it's, so.
Yeah. Julianne, do you have a question?
I don't really have a question, Erica. I just wanted to say thank you to the Marshalls. I really enjoyed the discussion. Dr. Marshall, I've seen you several times at many symposiums. I'm a colon cancer patient. And I've gone to the Georgetown symposiums over the last 5 years to learn.
Hello again.
Hello. So I've just really enjoyed this discussion, and I was a little bit humbled listening to some of this because I am one of the patients that the current healthcare system works for because my husband has insurance through his job. And now should anything happen to his job, I've been on disability long enough that I have Medicare. And so again, will not be affected. So it's been a humbling discussion to listen to and try to wrap my brain around the difficulties of our healthcare system and how to improve it.
I might tell everybody, it's a history lesson, is that if you think about what insurance is everybody puts $5 in together in a club. And when your house burns down, everybody gives you the $5, right? Because it doesn't happen very often, right? So you're working together to protect yourself against catastrophic rare events. That's what insurance is, really. Health insurance doesn't make any sense, right? Because everybody needs it. It's like cutting the grass or painting. Everybody needs gas in your car, or whatever it is. It's a consumption. It's going to the grocery, and you don't go into insurance markets to go to the grocery to pay for your groceries, right? You do it yourself. So you're saying, Juliana, that it's your husband has it with a job. So do I. That started after World War II, because before that, health insurance was catastrophic health. If you had a car wreck and you were in a hospital for 3 months, that's when it kicked in. But there weren't drugs that cost very much money. So you didn't need day to day. There wasn't a lot of other healthcare to consume, right? So you didn't need it. So after World War II, it starts with, we'll begin to provide you healthcare as an incentive to come work for our company or this company. And it's still there, right? That it's still part of employment, that you're paid, you're supported, or at least some employment. We're now starting to see, as Jennifer points out, a lot of jobs don't have health insurance as part of it. There's those kind of benefits are beginning to tail off because, simply put, they're just too expensive to bundle in to, certain jobs. They just can't afford to do that. So, and then the bill that I referred to earlier as part of this was doubling down on the insurance model, because it was a Medicare, not job, it was government insurance, where we're going to expand the expansion of Medicare to cover even more stuff. So this false economy started a long time ago. And so when you start to talk about how do we go from here, could we remove it from our jobs, right? How disruptive would that be? The employers would be happy, right? Employers would be happy about that. And then instead, Georgetown would pay me that much more money, right? And then I get to go buy insurance, or I get to buy a partnership. I could,
That's
I could
a good
pay.
thing. I'm not saying it's the best.
So anyway, then it becomes more transparent, because right now it lacks transparency from its beginnings, because it comes with job or government support. Anyway, I just think that's a useful thing to remember, is that's how we got here. Because then we have to think about how do we break it back down, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Out of the tangle we got.
And I think there is, I'm trying to, because I'm thinking about writing about this. It's just, I thank you for that. And I think that's one of the good things that came out of ACA was a big change, and it was painful for everyone. And I've worked for or just to your point that, I just lost my train of thought. I'm going to blame it on chemo brain, because I can, even though I'm way out. I'm just going to blame it. But I just,
it's too early to be drinking in Colorado, too.
What's that?
I said it's too early to be drinking in Colorado.
I'm not drinking yet. But oh man, so I'll just pass. But thank you for that, and it helps me artictalate some of the things I'm thinking.
Write about it. Write about it.
Yeah, I will.
So
Also, the Affordable Care Act also, we always talk about that. It actually is a business-oriented plan, right? So it basically says, we're not going to give you health insurance, but we're going to make it so that you can buy it. We're going to create models that you can buy. And if you don't have any money to buy it, we'll supplement that, right? So it's still sticking with an insurance model, but we're gonna make them on the marketplace. So I'd always, still to this day, don't understand why Republican Party saw this as a bad thing. It was actually a pro-business model that expanded healthcare consumption, which, I was, so anyway, I think
I'd agree.
I think
It came out of a Republican think tank, Regina Hertzlinger up in Massachusetts. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so it to me is a pro-business, individual responsibility kind of model, and not socialism is what they kept calling it. It's an individual, you buy it if you need it.
And I was an individual, and I don't know that I articulated this quite right, but I actually I was able to purchase insurance for the first time because of ACA.
Yeah.
But because I'm a small business, an individual proprietor or sole proprietor, I had to get something that was reasonably priced. And so I had this healthcare plan now, and it's great, but it carved out so many things because they didn't know at that time what they were going to lose. You know, it was just, those scales were balancing, but it is what I was trying to point to is two things that have really been positive, at least two major changes that have been positive that are getting the story rolling in the right direction, I think. And that we're aware now of what it costs. We're able to purchase even if we don't have an employer, basically.
Jennifer, I would add on, my younger sister is also a sole proprietor of her own business, and she's a freelance stage manager. And when the ACA came out, she was finally able to buy affordable health insurance that covered some of it covered birth control for her, and her
Right.
other insurance had not. And so it was a really good thing when it first came out for her. As we've gone through the years, it's not been as great. There's been more carve outs, as you said, but she is covered, and she can get things like mammograms and colonoscopies. And as a single proprietor, her own personal business person, if she didn't have insurance, she obviously wouldn't be able to afford those things. So I just wanted to piggyback on your thought and say there's more people. You're not a case of one. There are people out there who are benefiting. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but.
Well, guys, I'm going to jump in because it's 4:00 in Denver. And Casey has posted a bunch of links to some of her writings. Obviously,
just one link. But I've been in this zone for a very long time. But no, I mean, it's lovely. Erica and I have known each other for years. It's nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
And I'm writing, as I said, my next book this year because TikTok, baby, stage 4. There's no stage 5. But so that's happening. But it's not a book about medical care, although it'll be in there. But anyway, it was lovely meeting you. Good luck with the book. And
Yeah.
see you around the campfire.
Yeah. And Liza and John, thank you so very much. This has been just a delight to get to know you and be in your living room and see your decorations behind you and think about the snow outside, because I know that's happened. And, Happy New Year. And everybody else that's attended, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.